Romain Grosjean was excluded from the Italian Grand Prix after his Haas was deemed to have an illegal flaw. This is a great shame, as the 6th place Romain Grosjean achieved was both vitally important for Haas's titanic battle with Renault for 4th place in the standings, and as part of Grosjean's fight to prove himself after a terrible run of races in the first third of the season. While some are calling Renault bad sports for running to the stewards with photos of the Haas, it's important to note that A, in any game or sport you need to succeed within the rules or there's no point in playing at all, and B, Haas had already been warned about their flaw before the race weekend. In July, some teams have been asked to modify their flaws as they were shaped in such a way that they contravened the rules, and we'll see exactly how in a moment. They were given until the Italian Grand Prix to turn up with legal flaws. With the summer break about to kick in, Haas asked for until the Singapore Grand Prix to work with the team and their suppliers on getting the flaw modified, but the FIA simply told them that if they turned up with illegal flaws, they would be open to protest. And so they were. So what was it about the Haas flaw that made it illegal, and why does it matter? Let's delve into a quick summary of the rules regarding the flaw, and I'll make this as simple as I can considering just how complexly written the technical regulations are when it comes to the shape and size of bodywork. So when it comes to the flaw, there are two very important geometric bases to consider: the reference plane and the step plane. Now, a plane is just a flat surface. The reference plane is an imaginary flat surface from which every other vertical measurement of the car is, well, measured. The reference plane is important because it refers to the absolute lowest point of the car's bodywork, excluding only the skid blocks and plank which sit just beneath it. Now, the absolute floor of the car, the physical surface underneath the car that sits on the reference plane, must be completely flat. Its length has to run completely from the centre line of the rear wheels right to a line 430mm behind the front wheel centre line. And it must be between 300 and 500mm wide, symmetrically about the centre line of the car. So it doesn't have to be completely rectangular, but it must fit within this box. And the front corners of this floor on the reference plane must have a 50mm radius. That means they can't be sharp square corners, they have to be rounded as if they're shaped by a circle with a radius of 50mm. Now this is important, and we'll come back to this. Now, no actual fancy proper bodywork can be built as low as the reference plane. You can only start the bodywork at the step plane. The step plane is another imaginary plane that's 5cm or 2 inches above the reference plane, and this is the main part of the car's floor that's flat along this plane. In fact, the rules state that if you look at the car from below, within this area here you should not be able to see any part of the car except for the floor on the reference plane and the wider floor on the step plane, except the wing mirrors, they're allowed. Now, you're not allowed to smoothly shape the floor from the reference plane to the step plane. Anything living in the step plane has to be attached to the reference plane with a steep vertical surface like this. This is something you can see quite clearly if you look at the floor without the car on it. So here we're looking at the top of the floor, not from underneath. This concave area here is the reference plane sitting all surfboard shaped at the bottom of the car. Then there's this absolute vertical jump of 50mm to the step plane part of the floor, which extends out in all directions. You'll also notice that all the twiddly bargeboard bits and turning vanes that are inside this step plane area have a floor beneath them, so that if viewed from below, you'd just see the flat base. You can see it more clearly on this Mercedes floor, and also here on the Force India. Now, the whole reason the rules are written this way is to force a lot of breathing space under the car, so you're extremely limited in using the flat surfaces to generate downforce. That's why there are two strictly flat surfaces under the car and only a vertical surface allowed between them. Any fancy smoothing out of the join between the reference plane and the step plane would lead to all kinds of aerodynamic interpretations, and we'd have underfloor wings and vanes before you knew it. So right, what did Haas do that was so against the rules? Well, it was a little thing, but a thing nonetheless. So you can actually attach your turning vanes, barge boards, or whatever aero devices you want straight to the reference plane part of the floor, the very bottom floor. And if we look at Ferrari, we can see the floor sitting on the reference plane surface here, which forms a splitter, which is something that some people call the T-tray, hanging forwards. Attached to it are lots of aero devices. Now, remember how we said the front corner to the T-tray needed to be curved off with a 50mm radius? Now we can see the rounded corner right here, very clearly, with no bodywork interfering with it. Take note particularly of this piece of bodywork, which sits back from the rounded corner so as not to interfere with it. Now, when viewed from below, you'd see a very obvious round-cornered splitter sitting on the reference plane. All good. Now, when we look at the Haas, we see they've moved the attached step up to the step plane really far forward so it sits right against that corner. What's happening now is it is interfering with how the rounded corner looks when viewed from underneath, which puts that particular design outside of the rules. This Ferrari is legal, this Haas is not. It may seem like a silly small thing, but the way the air is managed at the point where the reference plane meets the oncoming air, this part of the body known as the splitter as it divides the air above and below it, is extremely important for aero right down the rest of the chassis, and as such is tightly governed by the FIA. It's a shame for Haas, and perhaps somewhat harsh if the summer shutdown simply did not give them enough time to redesign and build a new floor, but ultimately, when you push at the edge of the rules, you open yourself up to the risk of being disqualified, which is exactly what happened.